Undercover boss eats alone at his own restaurant, freezes when the waitress reveals a shocking secret. Under the gray sky of a late autumn afternoon, raindrops trickle down the car window, blurring into long, misty trails. Ethan Carter, the man behind the renowned Sunrise restaurant Empire, sat silently in an old sedan he had to borrow from the logistics department. Gone was the perfectly tailored suit, the gleaming Swiss watch on his wrist. Today he was just a regular man, wearing a faded jacket, a low-pulled cap, and worn-out sneakers, like a passing stranger no one cared to notice. It had been 15 years since he built Sunrise Restaurant from a small roadside stall, offering just 3 humble dishes and carrying burning dreams. But milestone after milestone, glowing financial reports, and surging profits slowly pulled him further away from that modest kitchen filled with rustic aromas. Now, Ethan Carter appeared more on financial magazine covers than in staff meetings. Boardroom strategies and $100 million expansion plans made him forget just how perfect that original taste once was. Recently, profit reports from his flagship branch, the very place where he had laid the first brick, started plummeting. Negative reviews flooded social media. Terrible service, staff indifferent, the dishes have lost their soul. What pain could cut deeper than seeing the name Sunrise, a symbol of radiant new beginnings, fade away right where it was born? Ethan took a deep breath, opened the car door, and stepped into the restaurant that had once been his greatest pride. No one recognized the silent man entering. Under the soft golden lights, the familiar sound of sizzling oil echoed from the open kitchen. But unlike before, there were no cheerful laughs, no warm greetings. Instead, weary faces and indifferent footsteps moved across the worn stone floor. He chose a table near the corner, a perfect spot to observe without being seen. When the menu was placed in front of him, Ethan gave a bitter smile. Every line, every dish, he knew them by heart, etched deep like cherished memories. But did that original flavor still remain? Or had it all been swept away by those ever-climbing numbers on his financial reports? His eyes slowly scanned every corner of the restaurant. In a hidden corner, a few staff members whispered their complaints. At the cashier, a soft sigh echoed. Ethan Carter knew today he wasn't here just to check the numbers. He was here to find something he had lost long ago on his climb to the top, the core values he began with, and more than anything, himself. And he knew he wasn't ready for what he was about to discover. The warm lights of Sunrise Restaurant gently cast golden hues across the room. But within that warmth, Ethan Carter, hidden behind his humble disguise, a faded coat, and fogged-up glasses, felt a creeping chill seeping through every corner. His hand unconsciously clenched the napkin as the waitress approached. She was very young, barely in her 20s. Her name shone faintly from a tiny badge, Lena, a slim figure in a uniform that hung loosely on her, a faint, weary smile on her lips, and eyes that quickly lowered behind long lashes whenever she met a customer's gaze. "What would you like to order today, sir?" Lena's voice was as light as a breeze, yet it couldn't hide the exhaustion behind it. Ethan looked up and, in her eyes, saw not just the practiced politeness of a waitress, but a deep resignation etched into every glance. "What's today's special?" he asked, deliberately lowering his voice, sounding like a lonely customer simply seeking some comfort in a quiet meal. "It's honey-glazed salmon and creamy pumpkin soup." Lena paused for a heartbeat. Then, as if suddenly recalling something, she leaned in and whispered so softly that only he could hear. "But the fish isn't fresh today. Management changed the delivery schedule, the stock arrived late, and they still forced the kitchen to serve it using frozen supplies. If you're looking for something truly good, I suggest you try the salad." Those words struck Ethan like a cold blade straight through the heart. He slowly set the menu down and studied the young woman before him more carefully. A flicker of panic crossed Lena's eyes, as if she had just revealed something she'd struggled to keep inside for far too long. And then, as if a dam had burst, she went on in a choked whisper, "You know, the head chef, Ethan, the one cooking back there, they're trying to push him out. They force us to mess up the recipes, lower the quality of the dishes. Even the tips we earn, some of it gets skimmed for an internal support fund. But no one knows what that fund is really for. And if anyone dares to speak up, their shifts get cut the very next day." Ethan sat frozen. In all his years in business, he had never encountered a financial report as raw and bitter as the words he just heard. No numbers, no charts, just a few trembling sentences from a frail waitress were enough for him to understand there were dark corners in his empire he'd never dared to look into. "And you, why don't you quit?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Lena let out a bitter laugh, a sound so hollow it echoed painfully. "My mom's battling cancer, sir. Every shift, even just 4 hours, is enough to buy her a few more painkillers. I don't have a choice. Ethan's hands clenched tightly on the table, his knuckles turning white. The report from just last week echoed mockingly in his mind. Staff morale is stable. Employee satisfaction remains high. Attrition rate is low. At that moment, Ethan Carter realized this wasn't just a quiet dinner anymore. He understood he had quietly walked away from the very people who were struggling under the roof that bore his empire's name, Sunrise Restaurant. And in that fleeting instant, his gaze lingered long on the young woman's weary but determined face. He knew from that very second, nothing could stay the same. After that night, Ethan Carter was no longer just a CEO sitting behind a boardroom table, reading polished reports. He returned to Sunrise Restaurant more often, quietly sitting in hidden corners, wearing the same old jacket and low-pulled cap. But this time, he wasn't just watching the food, he was observing the people. And what he witnessed made his heart ache with every beat. At 10 a.m., when the restaurant was nearly empty, Ethan sat at the bar and saw Lena, the petite waitress, carefully polishing each glass, her thin hands reddened by the cold water. Behind her, the morning shift manager Gara leisurely sipped his coffee, barking out orders every now and then over a single water spot left on a glass. At 3 p.m., as the afternoon shift began, Ethan overheard a sharp conversation. "Lena, you picked up the evening shift again? Got some heavy prescriptions this month?" A male coworker sneered. "I just need the money, that's all," Lena replied quietly, eyes cast downward, before silently returning to her work. In that moment, Ethan understood. Her resilience wasn't just for a sick mother battling illness. It was also her way of surviving a harsh work environment where the weak were trampled underfoot and the lazy and cunning held their heads high. At 9 p.m., during the peak dinner rush, Ethan sat quietly in the corner, his eyes scanning every detail. When the salmon dish arrived, he immediately noticed something was off with the taste. He didn't need to try. Ethan knew right away the ingredients had been swapped. Cheap frozen salmon replaced the fresh fish that was supposed to meet the standard. From his vantage point, he watched Gary receive a thick envelope from a familiar suppliera silent partnership that no financial report would ever disclose. That night, in the seeming stillness, Ethan realized just how far he had strayed in pursuit of profit. His balance sheets were always perfect, but behind those numbers were Lena's cracked hands, the resentful eyes of those forced to swallow injustice just to keep their meager paychecks. He remembered the early days standing behind a tiny street cart, sweat soaking his back, yet still smiling, because back then, he knew he was creating more than just delicious food. He was offering his team Hopi a workplace they could be proud of. Now, all of that seemed buried under mountains of profit reports, hollow praise, and lavish banquets that had long lost their flavor. Ethan asked himself, have I succeeded in business, but failed in my original dream? And then his eyes settled on Lena, standing quietly by the counter, counting every coin in a small glass tip jar. Her hands trembled as she checked her phone, looking at the latest hospital bills. Yet, when a new customer walked in, she straightened up and smiled, as if that sorrow had never existed at all. In that exact moment, Ethan Carter knew he could no longer stay silent. Emotions surged like crashing waves against his chest, and suddenly, the air in the restaurant felt heavier than ever. He stood up quietly, slipping away from his hidden corner unnoticed. But instead of heading out, he turned toward the back kitchen, the very place where, years ago, he used to stand amidst the heat rising from cast iron skillets, working shoulder to shoulder with his team, striving for culinary perfection in every dish. Now that same kitchen had become the place where whispers were exchanged, words never meant for the owner's ears. Beneath the flickering fluorescent lights, Ethan froze in place as he overheard Garithi, night shift manager, speaking in hushed tones to a supplier. Keep the same quality for next week's shipment, just like before. As long as the price is right and the envelopes keep coming, you know the drill. Who cares if it's fresh or frozen? Relax, Gary. It still looks perfect on the plate. And that old CEO? He barely ever shows his face around here anymore. Ethan clenched his fist so tightly, his knuckles turned white. That phrase, old CEO, hit him like a knife to the gut. But more than that, it was a harsh, undeniable truth. It was his distance, his absence, that had allowed men like Gary to run rampant in the very place he once called the soul of his life's work. When he returned to the dining area, he saw Lena quietly cleaning a table, just vacated by a group of customers. Under the dim golden light, her petite frame seemed even more fragile. As she cleaned, she discreetly tucked a medical bill into the pocket of her apron. Her hands trembled, But when she looked up to greet a new customer, her eyes held unwavering politeness and her lips curled into a strained but present smile. Just then, a faint rustling sound came from the tip jar at the bar. Ethan stopped in his tracks, watching as a coworker shamelessly reached in and took a portion of the tips that Lena had just carefully counted. She started to open her mouth to protest, but quickly lowered her head, biting her lip instead. Ethan couldn't take it anymore. He strode directly to the bar, his voice deep but unmistakably commanding, "Hold it right there. That money? Who does it belong to?" The entire room fell silent. All eyes turned toward the unfamiliar man, who somehow carried an undeniable air of authority. From behind the kitchen pass, Gary poked his head out, about to say something until his gaze locked with Ethan's cold, steel-hard eyes. He immediately went silent. "I don't know how long this culture of preying on the vulnerable has gone unchecked." Ethan's voice rang through the air, calm but razor-sharp. "But tonight it ends here, is it?" Ethan removed his cap and glasses, revealing the face most of the employees had only ever seen in framed photos displayed in the main lobby. The entire room fell into dead silence. "I'm Ethan Carter," his voice rang out with authority. "I've returned, and believe me, everything I've heard and seen, none of you can deny it." Lena stood frozen, her eyes red, unable to believe what she was witnessing. Ethan turned to her and spoke slowly, clearly. "From this day forward, no one will ever take a single dollar of your tips again, Lena, and no one here will have to suffer injustice like this at Sunrise Restaurant." That wasn't just a promise, it was a command. Under the brilliant lights of Sunrise Restaurant on that Monday morning, when most employees were still groggy from a long weekend, the large glass doors swung open. The man who once walked in wearing a faded leather jacket and a low-drawn cap now entered in a crisp navy blue suit, his tie perfectly straightened. But the fire in his eyes, that was still the same Ethan Carter, only this time he wasn't hiding anymore. The room seemed to freeze. Ethan gently unclipped the name tag from his chest. "Ethan Carter, CEO and founder of Sunrise Restaurant." Silence engulfed the space, punctuated only by the ticking of the clock, each second marking the rising tension. Garithi Dayshift, manager, stood frozen, his face pale, eyes darting around in panic for an escape. Jessica and Melissa, the so-called insiders, pressed themselves into a corner, eyes filled with terror. Ethan stepped up to the bar counter, his gaze sweeping across every face. His voice echoed through the room, calm but unshakable. "I'm not here to listen to excuses. I'm here to face the truth and end it, right here and now." With a subtle nod, the security team brought in a small projector, and on the screen, undeniable evidence flickered to life. Gary discreetly shaking hands with a supplier, receiving a thick envelope. Jessica altering delivery schedules. Melissa swapping in low-quality ingredients. And the most heartbreaking moment, Lena wiping away tears in the stockroom, her chapped, trembling hands clutching a medical bill. The room was engulfed in an unbearable silence. After a long pause, Ethan turned back to face Gary directly. "Gary, do you have anything to say?" Gary stammered, his voice shaky. I was just following the cost-cutting protocols, sir. It was all for the revenue." Ethan spoke firmly, without hesitation. "You are terminated, effective immediately. And don't forget, I'll be forwarding documentation of your misconduct to the board and financial crimes authorities." He then turned toward Jessica and Melissa, his voice low but resolute. "You two as well. A business can survive with low profits, but it cannot survive with people who sell out their dignity." As the security team escorted the three out, Ethan's eyes slowly searched for Lynette, a petite young woman standing quietly in the corner, her hands tightly gripping an old cleaning cloth. Her face was filled with worry and confusion. Ethan walked toward her, his voice soft and sincere. "Lena, can you tell me why you left this place, despite everything you've endured?" Lena's voice trembled. "Because this is where my parents first met. It's the starting place of every dream in our family. I couldn't bear to watch it fall apart, sir." The entire room erupted with emotion. Ethan's eyes glistened. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a bank card. "There's $50,000 in this account. Enough to help you take care of your mother and continue your studies in hospitality management, just like you've always dreamed." Lena stepped back in shock. I can't accept such a large sum." Ethan smiled gently, his strong hand resting reassuringly on her shoulder. "This isn't charity, Lena. This is an investment in a person brave enough to stand tall and keep her dignity amidst injustice. You deserve this opportunity." And that very day, for the first time, Lena stood proudly on the employee honor podium, receiving a leadership development scholarship within the Sunrise Restaurant organization. The room burst into thunderous applause, and at the back of the hall, for the first time in a long while, A genuine smile returned to Ethan Carter's face. Not for profits, not for glowing financial reports, but because he had restored the most precious thing of all, the value of human dignity. The applause echoed through the hall like a rising tide, starting from the youngest employees at the back, then spreading to even the most senior staff. They weren't just applauding Lena, they were applauding a moment they thought no longer existed in a corporate empire. The moment of compassion, the moment when justice was truly served. Lena stepped onto the honor stage, her hands trembling as she received the scholarship certificate directly from Ethan. Her eyes were red, but shining with a pride she perhaps hadn't allowed herself to feel for years. Thank you, Sunrise, and thank you, Mr. Ethan, her voice broke. I used to believe that in this world, the only way to survive was to keep your head down and stay silent. But today, I understand that having the courage to step out of the shadows can also lead to the light. The entire hall fell silent. This wasn't just a thank you, it was an awakening. In the corner of the room, an elderly busboy, Mr. Marco, who had served at Sunrise for 20 years, quietly wiped away a tear. His calloused hand gently patted the table in rhythm with the growing applause. He turned to a younger colleague and softly said, "Today, Sunrise has truly come back, don't you think?" Ethan turned to face all the employees, his eyes gleaming with resolve. Sunrise Restaurant wasn't born to become a soulless empire obsessed with profits. It was created from small food carts, from sleepless nights spent over hot stoves, and from the simple dream of seeing people smile not just because they ate well, but because they knew they were respected. He paused, his voice lowering. From this day forward, I officially relaunched the Sunrise Rising Stars program where anyone among us, whether a server, a kitchen hand, or a janitor, will have the opportunity to train, grow, and one day stand in leadership if they have the skill and a heart big enough. The hall erupted in cheers of agreement. Hope was reignited among people who had once quietly come here just to survive, but now found a new reason to stay and to dream of a different future. As night fell, the lights from Sunrise Restaurant shone brightly onto a street long accustomed to the shadows of forgotten dreams. Lena stood by the window, still holding her scholarship certificate, her tears not yet dry. Ethan walked up beside her, quietly asking, "Do you still think this place is just a weary stopover?" Lena gently shook her head, her teary smile filled with new light. "No, sir. From today, this is where I'll start dreaming again." In the distance, passers-by stopped, gazing at the brilliantly lit restaurant and the quietly replaced signboard that now read, "Sunrise Restaurant, where dreams rekindle with the dawn." Oh, under the golden hues of sunset streaming through the grand glass windows of Sunrise Restaurant, the announcement ceremony for the new reform policy took place right in the main hala space that had once been drowned in petty disputes and weary sighs. But today, that space shone brightly with radiant faces and eyes lit up with hope. Ethan Carter stood before all his employees not as a withdrawn figure cloaked in a stiff business suit, but as a true leader, his gaze calm, his voice warm, yet full of conviction. Starting today, Sunrise will return to the true meaning of its name, a place where every day begins with the light of new hopes. He slowly swept his eyes across the faces turned toward him and continued, "I hereby announce the launch of the Sunrise Reborn policy. 3 immediate commitments will be enacted today. 1. Increase welfare benefits for all employees, ensuring that no one in the Sunrise family needs to worry about basic necessities like meals or healthcare. 2. Initiate the Sunrise Rising Stars Leadership Development Program, creating a fair and transparent path for career advancement, where anyone can rise through the ranks based on their abilities and dedication. Send. Rebuild our corporate culture on the foundation of respect and kindness, because I've come to understand this deeply. A company may grow through profits, but it endures through its people." The hall erupted in applause, but unlike the polite, obligatory claps of the past this time, it was the true rhythm of gratitude, unity, and the burning desire to be part of something greater than themselves. In the front row, Lena sat quietly, no longer wearing her worn-out uniform. Now, she was the Assistant Operations Director of Sunrise, a role that, just a few months ago, she hadn't even dared to dream about. Her new name tag gleamed under the lights, Lena Collins, Assistant Operations Director. As the ceremony concluded, Ethan left the stage and quietly made his way to the top floor of the restaurant, the one with the largest window, overlooking the bustling streets and the warm glow emanating from within the restaurant. From there, he saw Lena enthusiastically guiding a group of new employees, her eyes no longer clouded with sorrow, but shining brightly with pride and hope. In the open kitchen, dishes were carefully prepared with the freshest ingredients, not because the policy dictated it, but because of the sincerity in the hearts of those working behind the stoves. Ethan let out a soft sigh, this time one of relief. He gently placed his hand on the cool glass window, his gaze distant. Asterisk, asterisk, at last, sunrise has truly found its light again. You can build an empire from nothing, but if you forget why you started, all of it becomes nothing more than a castle built on sand. A sustainable business is not built solely on numbers, but on loyalty, on people who cherish one another, and on relationships that time cannot erase. And when the door behind him quietly opened, Lena stepped in, gently standing by his side, both gazing out at the city fading into the night. Not a word was spoken, but in that moment, they both knew a new beginning had truly arrived. And this time, no one would be left behind. Under the soft light of sunset filtering through the tall windows, the last rays of the day cast a warm glow on the microphone before him, as if blessing the historic moment unfolding at Sunrise Restaurant. Ethan Carter took a deep breath and slowly delivered his words. Asterisk, asterisk. From today, Sunrise will return to the true meaning of its name, a place where every day begins with the light of new hopes. And from this day forward, I officially close a flawed chapter to open a new one, where people come before numbers. He leaned slightly forward, pulling back the red velvet cloth covering the board behind him. With a gentle tug, the cloth fell, revealing 3 new guiding principles of Sunrise, prominently engraved on the gleaming glass panel. Sunrise reborn, rekindling the light of dawn. Ick, better welfare, better lives. 2. Equal opportunities, success earned by your own hands. 3. A culture of kindness where everyone is valued. The hall erupted in thunderous applause, but unlike the ceremonial clapping of the past, this time every hand that clapped did so from the bottom of their hearts. Ethan could see tearful eyes, smiles that could no longer hide their happiness, and faces shining with renewed faith that many had thought lost forever. In the front row, Lena, now dressed in a graceful pale gray suit, her new name badge gleaming under the light, lowered her head slightly, tears quietly rolling down her cheeks. But this time, they weren't tears of sorrow, they were tears of a new beginning. Ethan stepped down from the stage, walked past the rows of seats, and stopped in front of Lena. Reaching out, he gently took her hand. Asterisk, asterisk. Lena, from this day on, you are not just the one who keeps the flame burning in this restaurant. You are the guiding light for the next generation. Welcome to your new journey. Lena stood up, biting her lip to hold back her emotions. And as she stepped onto the stage of honor, the applause roared like crashing waves. For the first time in her life, she stood tall, looking out over everyone from the position of a leader, not as the timid waitress weaving through narrow tables, but as someone who now lights the way. Asterisk, asterisk. At the end of the ceremony, Ethan quietly left the crowd and climbed to the highest floor, the place he always sought after every turning point. Through the large window, he gazed down at the bustling street and the warm golden lights glowing from Sunrise Restaurant itself. Below, Lena stood among the new staff members, her hands gracefully demonstrating each small task, her radiant smile shining like the first light of dawn. Ethan's eyes softened, a gentle smile forming at the corner of his lips. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about profits or staring at balance sheets. He simply wondered to himself, asterisk, asterisk. Isn't this the Sunrise I always dreamed of? A soft breeze swept through. The door creaked open slightly. Without turning around, Ethan knew Lena had entered. She stood beside him, her hand gently resting on the cold glass. Mr. Ethan, I think the most beautiful dawn always comes after the darkest nights, doesn't it? Lena softly spoke. Ethan turned to look at her, nodding slowly. Yes, Lena, and this time, that light will never fade again. And from that window they stood in silence, watching the city bathed in lights. Nothing more was said, but in that moment, they both understood. Tomorrow, Sunrise would no longer just be a name on a signboard. It had become a symbol, a beacon of the values they vowed to preserve for the rest of their lives. You may build towering skyscrapers, expand your empire to the farthest horizons, but if along those steps to success you forget the people who once stood by your side, forget the eyes that once placed their trust in you, then in the end, what you stand upon is not the peak of glory, but the peak of loneliness. A business destined to endure cannot rely solely on cold numbers or thick financial reports. It must be built on sincere handshakes, honest eye contact, and hearts that can still be moved by the simplest of human stories. The greatest wealth in life has never been locked away in safes or stock portfolios. It lives in the happy smiles of people who became better because of you. True success is not measured by profits, but by how many lives have grown, found happiness, and become better while walking alongside you. And in the end, when you look back, what will make you smile won't be billion-dollar contracts, but the moment someone calls you these two words, an inspiration, asterisk, asterisk,